So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Johnson Fung, a lover of many things. Johnson taught piano and guitar at Roberts Center of Performing Arts prior to achieving his BA and SC. What is an SC? A BA and SC, science, in organismal biology and philosophy from McGill University. I gotta look some things up. He became the director of storytelling for the Millennium Network Community of Canada before co-founding the Message Studios, Inc., a design firm in Montreal. There, he redesigned the office to be mobile and worked in 59 cities across 21 countries. We're going to have a hell of a story to tell here in a minute. Deciding that he was ready to settle down, he earned his MBA and MA, or Master's in Education, from Stanford University, while co-founding the Grammaticus, a private high school in Canada, cultivating students at the intersection of philosophy and innovation. He is currently a business strategist for worldwide education programs at Adobe. Please help me welcome Johnson Fung.
I am not the vampire. Hello, was great. Beautiful day, huh?
Yes.
I'm from Canada, and so this is what it looks like in Canada right now. Not actually, but every time I tell my friends I'm in California, this is how they describe it. So thank you for having me here today. It's really exciting to be here as someone who's young and not an experienced educator and talk to a room full of educators about the future of education. I feel like I've been at Adobe for 2 months and I was like, is this a prank? So hopefully we'll have some fun together and we'll look at some stuff that's cool. So today I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about how I'm thinking about what the future of work looks like, and particularly about the search for happiness, meaning, and individuality. And then comparing that to, well then what does the future of a student look like? And once again, I want to say, I'm not an expert. I am just an excited, interested observer. And I won't have any answers about what the future looks like, but I'm going to have a ton of questions. So my hope is that by the end of this talk, you're going to have all these questions that you're going to want to ask and discuss with each other. And because I'm talking about the future, I'm sure that for every article or fact I bring up today, there will be another article that completely refutes it, which I think is part of the fun about talking about the future. So, I think it's important for you to get an idea of who I am and for me to kind of start this first third of the talk about my past, because when I think about the future, it is so incredibly biased by my past. And I also think that the way I've gone through my career is so indicative of the possibilities that were made because of technology, particularly because of Adobe, and you'll see why in a second. So I was born in China, moved to Canada when I was 3, and when I first went through high school, my first job was at Roberts Center. So you have to understand, Robert is a 7-foot, 300-pound Russian guy, and he's like the most meanest piano teacher I've ever had in my life. And he said, you should come work for me and be my receptionist, and I'll pay you under the table for $5 an hour. So I was like, yes, okay, this is my chance, right? So I get in, I'm a receptionist, turned into a piano teacher, and I found out through high school that girls didn't date pianists. So I learned the guitar, which was significantly easier and more effective. As I was learning guitar, obviously I wanted to be in a band because being in a band was super cool. It was like the startup of the 90s, right? So you wanted to be in a band. So I was in this band, and we were poor and we didn't have part-time jobs except for my $5 an hour job, and we wanted to record a CD, and we didn't know how to do it. So I was like, don't worry about it. We can learn anything we want to do online. So we rented a mixer, we went online and just Googled or Yahoo'd or asked or whatever it was back then. It was how to record a CD. So we learned and downloaded some Adobe software and some Ableton software and some Cubase software, and just basically pressed every button we could find to try to record this thing, and we had no idea what we were doing. And the first time we broke the mixer, the second time we broke the microphone. There's this warning light, it's a peak light when you're recording, and when it turns on, it means that you're putting too much energy into the mixer. We interpret that light as the thing can't hear us unless it's on. So, anyway, we record the CD, it comes out, and we listen to it, and we're like, this sucks. We're a terrible band. We're terrible. And I was like, don't worry, guys. This is before the advent of MP3s and digital music, so I said, listen, nobody's going to hear the CD before they buy it. They're just going to look at the CD cover. So as long as the CD cover looks professional, they're going to buy it. And so we sat back down and we're like, let's learn how to design something, beautiful, so that we can trick our friends once to buy our CD. So that's when I first learned how to use Photoshop. And that's when I first, put together the CD cover, tried to figure it out, misprinted it a bunch of times, inverted the colors, all those things, and put out the CD. And finally we're like, well, we have this cool CD, it looks cool, but we don't have a website. So I was like, okay, and this is when GeoCities was still a thing. So I went on to GeoCities and tried to figure out how to make a website. And when I say figure out how to make a website, I mean I just copied kind of pixel for pixel the same website as the Limp Bizkit website. I was a cool kid. Right? So I have this website that's pretty much exactly the same. Our band name's in it instead of the Limp Bizkit band name, and our pictures are kind of in it. And we start selling the CD. So I get a call 2 weeks later from a guy, and he's like, hey, listen, I saw your band's website. I haven't heard any of your stuff, but you look professional, so I think it's cool. Do you want to open up for this new band that's coming up? Yeah, sure. So that band was Sum 41. And we were terrible. Terrible. We were never ever called back. So all that is to say is that I learned two things during that period of time. I could do anything I wanted if I could learn it online. And number two, the internet made it possible for people to the internet made it impossible for people to tell that I was an amateur. And so this gap between being an amateur and a pro, just closed. And suddenly my brain was turning, all these possibilities were available in this instant gratifying, short term, no need to have long years of discipline, which is perfect for my teenage kind of mind. So going back to after that, I started undergrad at McGill University in biology and philosophy. Philosophy because I loved it. I loved thinking about my purpose. I love thinking about ethics. I love thinking about relationships and empathy. And biology so I can convince my dad that one day I would still be a doctor. He's still thoroughly disappointed. In any case, when I first got there, I joined a bunch of clubs like most teenagers do, and what I found was every single club needed a website, needed something like a poster, needed something recorded, and suddenly all these skills that I was developing, mostly just to build this love for music, became useful in these clubs. And as I was building sites for these clubs, one club decided to suddenly pay me. And that was when I was like, I can get paid for this stuff. That's kind of cool too. That payment led to a small business paying me to do a website. And again, they were paying very, I charged $400 to do a website. But $400 to work for one weekend as an undergrad is pretty sweet, right? So this was happening, and the way I got more and more sales was through Craigslist. Now, everybody on Craigslist, on every day, you'll see this if you go on today, there will be businesses basically saying, this is my business, this is the website I want, send me your proposal. And back then, me and my best friend, who had now joined my business as a salesperson, we didn't know how to write proposals. So what we did was we went onto Craigslist, and we posted up an ad that says, hey, we're this company, and we want a website, send us your proposals. So in 24 hours, we had 100 proposals from all our competitors, and we gathered them all together, and we went into Photoshop, and we basically combined the best pieces of all of them. We didn't steal their work, we just stole their format, and their pricing, and their summaries. We put this up, and suddenly we went from like these two undergrads who like did some websites for some clubs to literally negotiating the same deals as like a big 12-person full-time Montreal design firm. So we became a Montreal design firm. Pretty cool. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay. There. Okay. So we started this firm, and we made every mistake you could possibly think about making. We were terrible business people. You're starting to see a pattern here. And we hired too quickly. We had too many people. I think we had 7 full-time people. They were all above 30. We were 21. We were also doing full-time school at the same time. So we would wake up. Our office was our house. So we would wake up in our pajamas and go to the office, which isn't exactly great for morale or professionality. And then we would have to go to an exam, and then we'd mismanage. We fired too late. We almost got sued once. We had a contractor who extorted us. It was crazy sauce, right? And I remember every single time we would sit on this couch every 2 weeks when payroll was about to happen, and I would look at my best friend, who was my business partner, and I'd be like, hey dude, how much do we owe for payroll? And he'd be like, $27,000. And I'm like, how much do we have in the bank? And he'd be like, $400. All right, let's do it. And we would somehow earn more contracts or like finish a contract or whatever it is, and we just always make it like plus minus $200 or $300, right? Like every time. And I did this for 6 months. We worked 20-hour days, 7 days a week, like nonstop to make this happen. And we just sat there. Something's got to change. Like we're 20, we've seen like $500,000 worth of cash come through our hands, and we've kept none of it. Like literally what we ate was determined by how many contracts we had that week. So we said, okay, let's do something radical. Let's completely change everything. So we took all our employees and we turned them into contractors where they could work from home and they could take other clients and all that kind of stuff. We fired somebody who we should have fired way early on, and we also let go of a ton of clients. 80% of them. We said, sorry, we're not going to do your work anymore. And that's actually a really scary thing to do when you're running a business, to like kick 80% of your clients out the door. Now we're sitting here in this office, in our home office, just the two of us in a room that used to fit 10, and it's me and him. And he goes to me and he's like, you know, we could be anywhere in the world right now, and no one would know, because all the clients we have left behind are all telecommute. They're all in the U.S. They're in Europe. They're other places, and all our employees, they're at home too. So he goes, do you want to travel the world? And you don't really say no to that when somebody. If anybody asks you that, say yes. Okay? So I said yes, and we looked at our entire business. We looked at all the technology that was available, and I remember having this whiteboard of literally 300 different types of software and hardware and protection and all this stuff, and we said, can we match this want of traveling the world by empowering ourselves with some combination of these services which will allow us to do it in a safe way? And unfortunately, my bio has a bunch of spoiler alerts, so you now know it was possible and we actually did do it. So we went and created all these contingency plans. We had triple hard drives. We had this whole plan. I have it in a PDF somewhere, where it basically was, if we get mugged and stripped down to our underwear, could we restart our business within 72 hours? Could we buy a laptop from the local shop? Could we then immediately install Dropbox on it, which would restore all of our files? Could we then go to Western Union, do this, and that, figure out digital payments in this way, and then just get up and started again? And then we were able to do it. And again, it comes back down to this original idea I had in high school, which was anything I wanted to do, I could do if the internet could teach me how to do it. So I finished this journey. I wrote my Stanford application on my iPhone while I was riding a train in India. And I'm typing all this stuff out. And I'm getting this feeling of, I'm living the life. It's awesome. Life is awesome. But I'm feeling this sense of emptiness or sadness or not fulfillment, basically, which is a crazy thing to say, given what we were doing. And I got into Stanford, and when I was at Stanford, I guess by the time I finished, this was kind of the mapping of like the stuff I knew how to do. And just to show you, the blue is all the stuff I learned formally, and the red was all the stuff I learned on the internet. And my career was really focused on this stuff. I'm not sure why I got my undergraduate degree. No, it was good. I expanded my horizons and really, anyway. So when I got to Adobe, I was sitting in this interview and I was like, listen, they're like, why do you want to work here? And I said, you know, I've spent literally more than 30,000 hours on your software. And your software has enabled me to do literally every cool thing I've done in my past. And what was fascinating was even at this point, I didn't consider myself creative. I sucked at art. Like my only B- was the B- that I got from my color wheel. Because I couldn't get the paint to not like have that clear line in between each one. And so it just became a big slob of brown all over, right? I'm not creative. I can't draw a face. Like every hand I draw looks like 5 sticks that are equal lengths sprawled up in a circle. It doesn't make any sense. So I never considered myself creative. But I think that, I started understanding when I was in this interview that I was creative in a sense that I was able to create. And this difference between the traditional thought of what is being creative, which is, you know, being artsy, learning with paints, dealing with colors. I think when we look at technology and what it's able to do, we have to think about that word now meaning the ability to have many, many different ways to solve a problem. And to be able to look at those different solutions and say, which solution has never existed before? Let's try to do that. Okay? And we're going to talk about that a little more moving forward. So when I got to Stanford Business School, and don't tell anybody this, but the people I talked to were amazing. You can tell them that. The people that I talked to were amazing. My classmates were amazing. They were coming from some of the most prestigious big firms. They were coming from the Goldman Sachs and the McKinseys. They had the career that you're supposed to want. But they felt consistently unhappy at the beginning of school. So I talked to everybody, just, yeah, I'm not happy, I'm not fulfilled. And I'm like, I know, I'm not fulfilled either, that's crazy. Like, this is what I did, and I feel so privileged and kind of a bad person for being unhappy. So I went into this kind of interesting discovery of why are we so unhappy? Why are me and my cohort, from a standard point of view, from a newspaper point of view, it looks like we're quite successful. Why are we unhappy? So I came about, okay, and this question of why we're unhappy is going to lead us to this future of work, because I think the stressor that is making us unhappy is leading to the world that we're going to create, or that we've already created as a result of us trying to solve this unhappiness. So I was reading this blog about why Gen Y is unhappy. And the guy's name is Tim. He writes on a blog called Wait But Why. And hopefully blogs have some credibility now. He does cite a lot of stuff, but we're just going to go through the story and you can decide what you think is legitimate and not. And basically he talks about Gen Y being this generation, late 1970s up to the millennial. And I would argue that they're building the future. And so he says there are 3 things that define Gen Y, and I'm sure you've heard this before. They're wildly ambitious. They have this need to be special, and they're taunted by social media. And I certainly, as a Gen Y person, to a fault, adhere to all of these things. And so he tells this story. He says, okay, think about this. This is Lucy. She is a Gen Y yuppie. He calls them gypsies. And she's unhappy. And to understand why she's unhappy, we have to look at the simple formula, he says. We have to look at this, which is happiness is equal to your reality minus your expectations about how you're supposed to do. Okay, really simple. It's his illustration. I couldn't draw this well if I tried. So to understand what Lucy's expectations are, we gotta look at Lucy's parents, baby boomers. But to understand where their expectations come from, we gotta look at their parents, who are part of the greatest generation, right? So they've gone through the Great War. They've gone through the Depression, and when they were teaching their kids, the baby boomers, they basically said, listen, the only thing that matters is economic security. Like, get a job that pays steadily, that's secure for a very, very long period of time. And hopefully you won't hit a war and you won't hit the Great Depression again, right? So this was the expectation that baby boomers had. And as such, their expectations for their career was just this stable, lush, grassy green lawn, right? This is what the American dream, as a Canadian, I perceive it. And so the baby boomer's career expectation was very much like this. Hard work over many years. You slowly worked your way up, right? And you slowly got to this place where you had your nest egg, you had your stability. And because of the economic booms of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the reality of the situation was way better than what the expectations of the baby boomers were. And again, this is hyper-generalization, right? But as a result, what baby boomers told their children with their optimism and the happiness they received from, exceeding their expectations was that you can be and do anything you want. Again, this is hyper-generalization. There's obviously a ton of other things involved, like the Industrial Revolution, like the advent of individuality and personalization, hyper-liberalism, all of those things, right? But, just simplify. So what ends up happening is Lucy's green grass now has flowers all over it, right? She wants to see beauty in every single place. That's what she's expecting. So that brings us to the first point. Gen Y are wildly, wildly ambitious. And to illustrate that, this is probably what most Gen Ys think when they think about their career. I'll read it out to you for those in the back. I suppose I could be president, but is politics really the truest calling of my heart? No, that would be settling. And if you look at, this is the Google Ngram, which basically searches through words in all of Google books and looks at frequencies. The idea, and of course this is not like a crazy awesome data point, but the idea that a secure career is popular has been going down since the 80s, and the idea of a fulfilling career has been going up. And from an anecdotal point of view, every single person I talk to that's in my cohort, first and foremost, cares more about having a secure career, a fulfilling career than a secure one. And I've seen so many people quit traditionally amazing jobs in order to open like hipster cafe shops in certain places, right? So that's one. Number two, Gen Y has this huge need to be special. And a huge part of that is, we've been told it, right? This is what we've been indoctrinated with. Every single product that we deal with, every single TV show I watch, literally 90% of my apps say hello to me when I open them, and some of them use my name, right? Like, I am absolutely super special all the time. So, the research shows the same, and again, like, there are many articles saying that Gen Y is totally not this at all, right? So, hopefully this opens up questions more than it is me saying this is what I think it is. But just, again, for the people in the back, Gen Y has unrealistic expectations and a strong resistance towards accepting negative feedback and an inflated view of oneself. A great source of frustration for people with a strong sense of entitlement is unmet expectations. They often feel entitled to a level of respect and reward that aren't in line with their actual ability and effort levels. So they might not get the level of respect and reward they're expecting. So remember that steady, slow career graph? This is what it looks like for the Gen Y. There's an expectation that my first career, that my first step is going to be incredible, and I am going to be CEO in 3 years, right? So if we look at if happiness is reality minus expectations, you end up with this huge drop, which is what this looks like, right? Those are your expectations, that's your disappointment, those are your peers. And what's crazy about this is that, like, this is not including accessibility, this is not including, like, privilege. This is, like, the most, we feel this, which is all weird and in and of itself, but may represent a bigger trend to something else. Lastly, we're taunted by social. So in addition to being low, every time we look at Facebook, everybody has an image crafted, right? So when we look at people around us, we think we're the only ones who have failed this expectation, right? So have you heard of Facebook image crafting? You haven't heard it, but you've seen it all over the place. This is Facebook image crafting. What a year graduated with a PhD from Cambridge, moved to London, worked in 16 countries, traveled to 4 continents, perpetuated an obscene carbon footprint, survived chloria, influenza, bronchitis, etc., etc. So you've seen this happen all the time, and this is what we look at when we look at Facebook, right? And so how do we feel about ourselves, and how do we interact with social when this is also plaguing us? Okay, so here are the 3 things. And you're thinking, like, Johnson, you're being such a downer right now. Like, you're basically just saying bad things about millennials and yourself. And in one sense I am, but really what I think is that these stressors, the consequence of it is that we start building a world that addresses these things. And when you look at the world as it is currently being built, you see it, at least I see it, as a response to these things. So what do I mean by that? Wildly ambitious connects to, we're building companies that have to be big, they have to be disruptive. And I see this trend towards finding work that has social impact, that has some kind of meaning. I think that's a great thing, right? So no longer are we satisfied with the idea of, I'm just going to make this process and make it really efficient and make it last forever. It is, how do we take existing processes, break them completely apart, and build a completely new world? And you see that with these companies and what they're saying that they're doing. So Facebook, it's not just building a yearbook. It is connecting every single person in the world together. That is a big, hairy, audacious goal. If you look at Google, it's not just find the stuff you want on the internet. It is organizing all of the world's information together. And if you look at the stuff they're doing with Alphabet and all of the new technologies they're bringing to the course, you can see, obviously, that searching is not the only thing that they care about. If you look at Airbnb, it's not just offer, a nice way for people to share their houses. It's completely disrupt all of the hotel industry. And I think Tesla is pretty self-explanatory. Now, whether or not these companies are actually doing this is one question, but what they definitely are doing is expressing that this is what they're doing, because that is what is attracting talent. That is the narrative with which Gen Y wants to hear and wants to be a part of, right? So when we're thinking about educating the next generation of students, which we'll get to, how do we include this sense, this ability to deal with this kind of disruptive innovation and this culture of disruptive innovation? Number 2, the need to be special creates this trend where I don't necessarily want to work for a big company anymore. That the security provided to me by a gigantic brand behind me is no longer as important as me feeling like I want to be individually expressive. That I want to know that my work is a result of me fulfilling my destiny and not someone else's, right? The reason that Steve Jobs' speech about not living your life for someone else is so popular is because it resonates with this core idea of the need to be special. And if you look at these companies that have come out, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, have you guys heard of Patreon? Really, really cool. So basically, it's like Kickstarter, except for instead of paying once, it's a monthly recurring subscription to a person who's usually an artist or a writer. And the idea is that you're now a patron of their arts in the same way that extremely wealthy people were patrons of artists in the past. So the ability to do this, the reason these become popular is it gives a venue for what was traditionally reserved for professionals, like all of the jobs my dad wanted me to be. So like doctor and lawyer and accountant and dentist and all of these things, where they were so secure in their skill that they were able to create their own practice and have this kind of micro business. We've now opened that up to anybody who wants to create anything, right? So lastly, there's this trend of being taunted by social. And when our self-value is so tied to us seeing and us comparing to other people, the businesses that we build on a positive split become inherently social and social first. And what I mean by that is not just that we're building more social networks, is that social becomes a core part of how every business works. And this, I don't think you guys can see that too well, but here are all of what is considered the sharing economy across different verticals. So for goods, you have Kijiji, you have Craigslist, you have eBay, you have Etsy. For services, you have Elance, you have Odesk, you have Crowdsourcing. For transportation, Uber, Lyft, Sidecar, Car2Go, Zipcar. I took a Zipcar here. Space, You have the spaces near me. You have AirBnB, you have homestaying, Money, Lending Club, Kiva, Indiegogo, YouTube, Flickr. Now here's the cool thing about all of these companies. They don't make any of their stuff, right? They don't. And this is in the description of this talk. Like, Airbnb is the biggest hotel, owns no property except for like their office, but that doesn't count. Craigslist, huge amount of traffic in terms of both favors and money going through, doesn't own any of the stuff. eBay, same thing. Uber, one of the biggest taxi companies in the world, doesn't own a single taxi. Okay, what does that mean? So, to summarize, moving away from what millennials are into how that determines the future of work, I think that the future of work is disruptively innovative. It's not going to be easy to find a company whose only mission is to continue what we've been doing for a long time and hope nothing bad happens. Number two, it's going to be entrepreneurial in culture. So even at a company, even if you're entering a big company, when I entered Adobe, one of the first things they told me was, you have to be an entrepreneur in this company. You have to take things and run with it. You have to look at how this company has been built, figure out the parts that are broken, and completely rebuild them. Lastly, it's going to be inherently social. So what does that mean for the future as a student? Having a work world that's disruptively innovative means that the future-ready student has to be resilient to failure. And I can't say this enough, they have to be resilient to failure. It doesn't mean they love to fail, it just means they get up afterward. Because it is impossible to try something new and never get it wrong. If you are in that situation, you're probably not trying anything new. Number two, this entrepreneurial culture needs to lead to a student who's creative in their problem solving. And when I say creative, I mean it the way I said it before. Not just being artsy, but really having all these different ways of solving a problem so that the solutions they find may be solutions that we didn't even think about. Lastly, because the world will be inherently social, I think students have to come up with an incredible sense of true empathy. Not just compassion, not just kindness, real empathy. And I'll show you what that looks like. So let's start with resilience to failure. Are you guys, you must be familiar with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset and fixed mindset. So if you're not, she's a professor at Stanford, and one of the things she talks about in education is the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And in relation to failure, the two mindsets react to failure very differently. So the fixed mindset basically says, I failed, therefore I'm not good at this thing. Okay. The growth mindset says, I failed, therefore I should try again, and I'll fail again, and I'll try again, and at some point I will succeed. And those two different mindsets completely change a student's ability to eventually innovate. And if you look at my life, I failed so many times, and like every single thing I've done, I've failed at some point. And because I am arrogant and stubborn and sometimes not as self-aware as I ought to be, I just kept going. And now I don't expect I do anything without having at least a few failures. And in fact, the only time when I feel like I fail is when I go through something and it works perfectly well. I just go, dang it, like I didn't push hard enough. And I think that that is the mentality that students will need if they're going to be in this place where everybody is expecting them to innovate. At Adobe, there's this thing called a kickbox that we have. And you basically go and sign up for this kickbox, and inside the kickbox is an American Express card with $1,000 on it, and then a bunch of steps. And then you can decide whatever you want to do, whatever you want to invent, whatever you want to create. And $1,000, it's kind of just a write-off. And this box represents, in a big corporation, this freedom to make any mistake you want. There is no expectation for this $1,000 to come back. And so when I'm thinking, I'm looking out for now in education and other places, where are places where we give students the room to truly fail in every aspect? And how do we then give them the ability to pop right back up and be resilient? The second is creativity and problem solving. So traditionally, when I remember the way I was taught in school, and maybe it was just my teachers, but you were presented with a problem and you were taught a process to solve that particular problem, right? And in terms of technology, for us, it was always, here's one program or one suite of programs that you're going to use to solve this problem. If you have this problem, use this program, and just learn it really well, do the certification, and then get it through. Become an expert. These are all the programs I've learned in the last 6 months to do my job from scratch. And now I think I'm like literally getting paid to use them now. So what it allows me to do, and what I'm saying right now, is that creativity and problem solving with technology is so much more about equipping students to be able to learn new software and be willing to experiment with new software at any time in both their student lives as well as their career, because that's what's going to be expected of them. And creativity and problem solving means that once you have this toolkit of all these different things that you know how to do, you're suddenly solving and finding solutions that are completely different than what the original problem asked you to do, right? And that is where innovation, I think, comes from. And if you don't have, if every time you look at a problem and you say, well, based on the skill set that I have, I don't think I can solve this problem, so I'm going to tell my boss that this is not our role, or that maybe we should get XYZ person to help me solve it, which sometimes is the case. If you do that, you're not going to survive that world, right? So this is how I think about being creative and problem solving. And again, looking at all the stuff that is self-taught, I think about my career sometimes if I never had those 2 pieces of insight when I was in high school. What if I never believed that anything I wanted to learn, I could learn on the internet and on my own? Okay. So, lastly, the world being inherently social means that we have to build people who are who are trained to understand empathy. And what I mean by that is, in the past, this was the customer-company relationship. It was, I want to have a relationship with this company that builds a product or a service, and we're going to have a relationship together. All those companies that I showed you there, and I believe that this is the way the world is moving forward, the company only acts as the interface between 2 customers. It is the company acts as the interface between me and some value that somebody else has. And even at Adobe, for example, which you think, okay, well, Adobe is a traditional company where you have services and software that you're giving to the user. Well, no, actually, if you think about it, we're actually providing services and programs to creators who are, through us, building a relationship with their clients and with other companies. And we're always managing that relationship between the creator and their client. So even for us, we're moving towards this direction. And there's a really cool article about the battle is for the customer interface. And when you're building a customer interface and you're building through product, this idea of empathy comes up through time and time again. Because no longer are you just thinking about how do I build a thing that's the fastest as possible, or how do I build a thing that is the biggest as possible. That's no longer good enough. What you need is to build a thing that gives people the best experience possible. So these job titles of experience designer, user experience designer, user interface designer, all of these entire industries have come up simply because we need experts in understanding how people feel and how people think when they go through a process. So there is design thinking, and during my 2 years at Stanford, I was lucky enough to be at the D school for a lot of it, like having a huge binge on sticky notes. And in the sticky note process, there is empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And empathize really is the big one. And if you go through any of these design thinking processes, if you don't do the empathy exercises properly, you don't get it. And when I say do the empathize, I mean sit down with the customer, listen to them, learn what their pain points are, feel what they're feeling. Because if you don't do that, you're unable to design a product or a service or a process or a piece of communication properly. And if you can't do that, you won't be successful in a world which requires every single business to be inherently social. So here's an example. I love this example of design thinking. So there's this guy, he's been designing MRI machines for 30 years, and he goes to Stanford D School and he wants to redesign the MRI machine, and he's not sure how to do it. And during his 30 years of designing the MRI, it's always been how we make it look smoother, how we make it more accurate, more powerful, that kind of stuff. And so they said, stop thinking about that for a second. Think about the experience of somebody who hates an MRI machine. So he thinks about it and goes, kids hate the MRI machine, right? It's like everything about that experience is terrible. You're only there because you're sick with something. There's this big Goliath of a machine. You're expected to stay there and sit still, and it goes, right? It's the worst. And he didn't have much of a budget. And the great thing about design thinking, about empathizing, is once you understand the core problem of the experience, it doesn't actually require, all the time, huge amounts of engineering resources to fix it. Here's how he fixed it. And like, from just the first glance, it's like, oh yeah, that's obvious. He made it look like a kid thing. So obviously it's better for kids. But you look at the interviews that he's done, and really the idea is like, when is it okay to have loud noises? Well, it's okay to have loud noises when I'm on an adventure. When is it okay for, when are you the most brave? Oh, I'm the most brave when I'm the hero in this story. And so what they're doing here is actually, before the kid goes into the machine, they tell him this big story about them being a main character going on a mission, whether that is a space shuttle mission or a submarine mission, whatever it is. And one of their key goals they have to do is stay still because the enemy is floating on top of them. Mm-hmm. And just by listening to the story and kind of addressing those key emotional factors of that experience, I don't know what the percentage is, but it was crazy how many more kids were able to stay still, right, in this place. And again, when we're talking about the relationship that this MRI designer is facilitating is not between the MRI machine and the child. It is the interface between the doctor and the child. It is the doctor that needs the stable image. It is the child that needs to go through this experience, and it is the MRI machine that acts as the interface between the two. And without understanding what that experience looks like, again, you don't end up designing an inherently social experience. Another example, we all love this one. Who can tell me what that is? Yeah, so easy. How did you know that? How did you know that? So if you live at IKEA, you must have a good experience, or you're a masochist. But at IKEA, if you think about the way they design it, it's incredible, right? They have thought through it in the same way that if you go to any other furniture company and they have not necessarily thought it through the same way. Other furniture companies may optimize, okay, we have this many square feet, we should put our most highest value items right at front, so when people walk in, that's what they're hit by, and then all the crappy stuff we're going to put in the back of boxes. That's the decision-making extent, right? If you look at IKEA, they say the first thing we want to do is make you feel aspirational. That's why you're here. You're here not because you're down, you're oh, I can't believe I have to buy another piece of furniture. You're here because you're probably in a place where you just moved, or you just got a bonus, so you're redecorating your room. And we really want to capture that experience and that emotion. So the first thing we're going to do is make you walk through all of these example living rooms to make you feel really great, right? And only after that do we give you an ability to choose your stuff. And then, oh, you're hungry? We have meatballs. And here's something that's just, again, a complete hypothesis of mine. Nothing to back this up. IKEA will not confirm nor deny. You know when they tell you that you have to clean your own table so that you can, so it's cheaper, so they don't have to hire people to come clean the tables at the restaurant? Well, I've done the math, and I don't actually think it's any cheaper. What I think it does do, it gives you a sense that you're at home. It gives you a sense that you're a part of the community, that you're helping out, that you're now emotionally invested in this experience. In the same way that you would put away the plates at your friend's house to make you more part of the family. And this idea of family, if you look at all of it, what's an IKEA member called? Isn't it like the IKEA family member? Something like that? Yeah. So, excuse me. Think about this as an amazing empathy-driven experience and where work is going. And a lot of people say, okay, well, that's only for designers and interior decorators and UI and all that. But I'm telling you, sales obviously, but product, service, communication, leadership, internal relationships with your coworkers. Engineers have to be hyper empathetic. Mathematicians even, maybe not. But many, many, many careers, not in the same way as before, have to involve this. So, to summarize, I think that this future of work is going to be disruptively innovative, entrepreneurial in culture, inherently social. And I think the future-ready student needs to be totally resilient to failure, creative in their problem solving, and highly, highly empathetic. And the phrase I want to end with, or the two words I want to end with, really, to summarize all of it, is that students have to be radically adaptable or have radical adaptability. I am totally not confident that my prediction of the future is the right one. That's the whole point, right? But what I do know is that it's going to be very, very, very different than it has been, and it's going to be very different than today. And so the only thing I'm really confident in saying is that students need every tool they have to be able to be radically adaptable. Okay? And just as a plug, some of you guys already have the entire Adobe suite with your site licenses, right? Can you clap if you know you have it? Okay, cool. So if you don't know, some of you may already have it and you don't know. But there's also the Connect Ed initiative that we do at Adobe. And basically, Adobe, through the White House, has committed about $300 million worth of software to Title I eligible schools. My coworker Emily says that I think all but one of Matiga school districts are eligible for this, which means that all of those schools are eligible for free Adobe software, which includes Photoshop Elements, Premiere Elements, Presenter, Captivate, eSign, and the Adobe Education Exchange. And just as a plug for the Adobe Education Exchange, it is this amazing web platform that has 200,000 educators where they're sharing lesson plans about how to use creative software to teach a particular thing. So a grade 4 teacher might say, hey, I'm teaching history and I want to use video as a part of it. I want the kids to create a video. Can you give me some tips on how to do that? There is another teacher from somewhere else who says, here is an amazing lesson plan that I put together that's totally Common Core aligned, all that kind of stuff. So check that out. And please come to me after if you want to learn more about that, or write down Emily's email address and shoot her an email. Thank you so much for having me.
Also, just to let you guys know, when I was trying to secure someone from the technology industry to come and to do one of our keynotes, I reached out to Adobe, and one of the great things for Johnson and with Adobe, I asked the question about how much do you think it might cost us for you guys to send somebody out there. He says, well, you know what, hold on that, let me get back to you. He got back to me, he says, why don't you put the money back to the kids and there just won't be a cost. So I really do appreciate that.